So yeah, we will do questions after our third speaker, who is Dr. Kristina Jackson. She is a registered dietitian and the director of research for OmegaQuant, and she's also an assistant professor at the University of South Dakota Stanford School of Medicine. Her focus at OmegaQuant has been on omega-3s in maternal health, and she helped create the company's prenatal DHA test and the mother's milk DHA test. But today she'll be presenting a case study that OmegaQuant has done looking at what optimal nutritional status means on an individual basis. So, Dr. Harris Jackson, welcome.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm very happy to be able to speak in person about what I've been doing over the last couple of years. And I have been, as she said, I have a lot of research experience, but I'm also a registered dietitian. And over the last 2 years, I've really put that hat on a lot more, and it's been really interesting. And that's what I want to talk about today, just my experiences working with real people. So we already went over that. And as we all know, personalized nutrition is booming in the business world and booming in the research world, but we have a long way to go. And so the definition that I found that I felt really covered the bases that I wanted to talk about were personalized nutrition uses information on individual characteristics to develop targeted nutritional advice, products, services, and to assist people to achieve a lasting dietary change in behavior that's beneficial for health. That is a long scientific definition, but it gives us all the keys we need. It's individual characteristics. It's about getting that individual to a better health. So the omega-3 index might not be what you think of when you think of personalized nutrition. Usually we think of lots of data, genetics, metabolomics, tons of information to tell us exactly the right path we need to take. But the omega-3 index has been a really useful tool for a simple thing. How do I know I'm getting enough omega-3? So it's a targeted, personalized nutrition tool that I've had a lot of interesting, I've had a lot of interesting interactions with people, even just working on this one nutrient. So the omega-3 index is the amount of EPA and DHA present in red blood cells. It's we measure it, this is a cartoon of a red blood cell, and the membrane of a red blood cell is full of fatty acids, lots of different kinds of fatty acids, and we measure all of them at OmegaQuant, and then we take EPA and DHA over the total, we express the EPA and DHA as a percent of total, and then we have a really simple omega-3 status. So in this example, we have 4 EPA and DHA molecules over 64 fatty acids. Your omega-3 index is 6.25%. The omega-3 index, as a dietitian, it's one of the cleanest nutritional biomarkers that I've seen. It is stable, it reflects intake, and that while there are things that affect levels besides diet, diet has a major effect on levels. So it's really, really nice to work with. So it's important to know what the context is of what should levels be, what do they look like. And generally we see that fish intake is the main big picture contributor to large groups of people having higher or lower levels. So to start on the higher end, we see people in Japan and South Korea. Those populations naturally have higher amounts of omega-3s. Their omega-3 index can be 8 to 10% just based on their diet, eating fish every day. Then we kind of go down the spectrum where places like Spain and Norway tend to be in the 6 to 8%. There's fish in their diet culturally, but maybe not as much. In the US and Canada, we do see the averages are around between 4 and 6%, and a lot of westernized countries are in that area as well. And then 2 particular populations we find that are very low are vegans, for obvious reasons. They don't eat fish, and the military. We've done several studies in the military, and they really do tend to come in with very low levels. And we've seen this with people who have high levels of activity, athletes, military. So that's another aspect of something that can affect the omega-3 index that I won't be going over as much today. but it is an emerging area that we're interested in. So that's what's typical. How do we know what's desirable? So the omega-3 index was proposed in 2004 by Drs. Harris and Von Schacke, and they proposed it based on risk for sudden cardiac death, essentially. So they looked at several prospective cohort studies and randomized controlled trials, and they pooled the data together, and they found that people with an omega-3 index of 8% were at much lower risk of dying from heart disease compared to people with an omega-3 index of less than 4%. So this is a risk factor argument. They're finding that there's actual health benefits to being above 8%. And this is just showing some of the studies that they used to determine those numbers. And then in 2017, they were able to pull together data over the last 20 years to be able to corroborate those targets. Is 8% really still a good target to look for or to get to? And this is a pooling study of 10 studies, 27,000 people, the omega-3 index, and the risk for total coronary heart disease and death. And they found that being at 8% provided 35% reduction in risk compared to 4%. So there is still something to this 8%. So that's the risk factor side of the omega-3 index, but as an RD, I also really like to look at its use as a nutritional biomarker. So in 2019, we at OmegaQuant decided to pool together our data. So we have people who send us their blood samples and we analyze their omega-3 index. We ask them 2 questions. How often do you eat non-fried fish? And do you take a supplement? And so we decided to look at this on aggregate, and with about 3,500 people, we found a really nice dose response. So the more people ate fish or reported eating fish, the higher their average omega-3 index was. And if they reported taking a supplement, the dark blue bars, they had about a 2% bump on average. So what's interesting about this is it gives more context. So if the recommendations are to eat fish once or twice a week, that gets you on average to an omega-3 index of 5 or 6%. A lot of people might get confused and think if I hit the recommendations for fish intake, that automatically means I'm gonna be at 8%. And it's an important thing to explain that an 8% omega-3 index, when it's dietary, is a pescatarian diet, essentially. It is a Japanese-style diet. And so it's really important to provide that context. So the only group that ended up with an average omega-3 index above 8 in this aggregate was the people saying they were eating fish 3 or more times a week and taking a supplement. So since the omega-3 index is a really nice nutritional biomarker, we kind of know what it means to be at each level. Why do I even need to test? I understand what I need to do, just do what the graph says. It's because 70% of the people taking supplements did not have an omega-3 index of 8. So people taking supplements are doing that for a purpose. When they're not getting to 8%, they're not strategically supplementing, and they're not getting the therapeutic dose that they might think they're getting. So why do so many people who are taking supplements fail to reach an optimal omega-3 index? For me, it's 3 things. It's dose, form in food, and consistency. And all of this is probably not going to be news to all of you, so I'm going to quickly go over some of the research behind it, and then I'm going to bring you through case studies of people that I've worked with this last 2 years that really hit home how this interacts, this research interacts in the individual clinical space. So the amount of EPA and DHA consumed is the most important modifiable factor determining the omega-3 index. In 2019, we had this question of how much omega-3 would it take to go from 4 to 8%. We really didn't know. So we were able to take about 14 studies where we did the blood work pre and post, and we knew exactly how much EPA and DHA was given. And then we made some calculations to see if we could have an equation. And We were able to find 2 equations, actually. One equation was not good enough, so we ended up with an equation for studies that used an ethyl ester form and studies that used a triglyceride form in these supplements. And we did not have enough data on phospholipid forms. So here this graph shows baseline omega-3 index on the x-axis and the dose of EPA and DHA on the y-axis, and it's targeted to 8%. And so if we look at the triglyceride line, which is the dotted line, if you're at 4% and you want to get to 8%, if you go to the y-axis, you need about 1,500 milligrams a day. If you're taking an ethyl ester form and you're at 4% and you want to go to 8%, you need above 2 grams a day. And that's what our calculators on our website show. There's a big difference between the recommended doses based on form. So what does form mean? Most of you guys also know this, but as a refresher, the ethyl ester and reconstituted triglycerides are how we have highly concentrated fish oil supplements, and these cartoons, I think, are really clarifying. The triglyceride is the glycerol with the 3 fatty acids, and that's kind of the natural form. And naturally, in fish, there's 1 omega-3, 1 EPA or DHA per triglyceride, and so that's why it's kind of a low concentration. The ethyl ester is that long, skinny one, and you can see it's smaller, so it makes sense that when they were able to process the fish oil this way, you could fit a lot more EPA and DHA in a capsule, and that's why a lot of the prescription, the first prescription omega-3s were ethyl ester form and continue to be. And then the phospholipid has 2 fatty acids and a pretty big head, so that's part of the reason why phospholipid forms often have concentration issues. The reconstituted triglyceride's interesting because they were able to keep the triglyceride form and add 2 or 3 EPA and DHA molecules to each glycerol form, and you get that nice absorption with the higher concentration. So we've seen this over time. People taking a triglyceride form get a little more absorption than people taking the ethyl ester form. This is a study with about the same dose, about 1.7 grams, and over 6 months. They both had really nice responses, just a little bit more in the triglyceride. And then food may be one of the reasons for this. So the interaction of taking an ethyl ester form with or without food is pretty dramatic. This is studying 2 drugs, essentially. But the main point is, after taking an ethyl ester supplement, this is showing the hours after taking the supplement without food, there's not that nice bump that you would see in absorption at about 4 or 6 hours that the other form had. But when you had high-fat meal with both of the forms, you had a nice response. You had better absorption in both cases. So a high-fat meal is interacting with the form and also interacting with how well things are absorbed. And my last point, consistency. So once you reach 8%, you need to keep doing what you did to get there. This is data from a little study we did with our friends and family at OmegaQuant. It was kind of a wellness study. So we all work at OmegaQuant, we think omega-3s are good, and yet do the individuals that work there know their numbers and do anything about it? And so we decided to offer free testing and supplementation and guidance to our friends and family. And we did this over the last year or so, and every 3 months we tested people and we asked them questions, and we provided supplementation for free for the first 6 months. And our group, we did have some really high, people with really high levels to start. We aren't the most normal group because we're in the omega-3 world. But what you can see is we went from 6 to 8 to 9% over 6 months, just what you would expect to see when you do this kind of intervention. But what happened at 9 to 12 months? These humans did their human thing, and we stopped doing what we were supposed to do. And we stopped providing the supplement. So for most of the people, we were providing the supplement, telling them exactly what to take, giving it to them at the right time. And look at that, when we thought, you guys learned everything you need to know, go off into the world, do it yourself. And that's what happened. It's not actually that surprising. So one of my favorite doctors is Dr. Cox from the show Scrubs. And one of the things he said is statistics mean nothing to the individual. So I can show you this beautiful group of this average dose response, and that means nothing to you if that's not what happens in your life, in your journey. And so it's really important to look at each individual and understand, I expect this to happen with a treatment, but if it doesn't happen, I know what to ask next. So here are some case studies. These are individuals that were either in our little study or they're people that I consult with. So these are a couple of guys that we work with, Adam and James. And Adam comes in, he's a young man, doesn't eat fish, 3.75%. That makes a lot of sense. He goes on 2 grams a day of ethyl ester and goes right up, 6-8%, exactly what I would expect, what the averages look like. James comes in and he tells me he's on 2 grams of triglycerides a day, triglyceride omega-3, but he comes in at 4%. So that's another reason to test. People, I'm sure he was taking something. I don't know if he knew what it was. I don't know if he actually knew the dose. And he took all kinds of supplements all the time, and I was not sure what he actually, he had them all over his desk. So it was like, what are you actually taking? So testing showed me, okay, he needs really some clarification. He wanted to keep going with the triglyceride, and the one we were using was liquid. So he thought that'd be fun to try. And so we stuck with the triglyceride. And we went with the 2 grams because that's what a teaspoon was. That was the serving size. So instead of trying to do like half teaspoon, we just went with the serving size instead of trying to hit that 1,400 milligrams. But for him, it worked. So when he had the consistency and testing and guidance, he was able to have success. So we had some people who had an interesting interaction with the form they were taking. So this is Nate. Nate came in taking about 1 gram a day of kind of a Costco style fish oil, and he's at 6%, which usually checks out. And then I double his dose to 2,000 milligrams of ethyl ester, and he doesn't move in the first 3 months. And this was my husband, and I know he was taking it. So, so that wasn't working for him. And so then after we got those first results back, I was like, okay, we're gonna change you up. We're going on triglycerides. Let's see what happens. And it doubled his score in the same amount of time. For him, it was important for form. So this isn't a 10% change for an individual. It's 100% change for an individual. Food can also make all the difference. So this was a consult. Lila and Frank, Frank was a doctor. They wanted to test, get a really high quality supplement. It was third-party tested. So they tested their omega-3 index. They started taking 1,400 a day. And Frank, in 6 months, he's all the way up to 8%. He's doing great. And Lila does not move at all. And so they're like, well, maybe we should increase our dose. So they go to another pill, 2,100 milligrams, and Frank does it in solidarity, and she continues to flatline, and he continues to increase. And then I asked Lila, when are you taking your supplements? And she said, I take them in the morning on an empty stomach. And Frank takes his before bed when he's not fasted. And I was like, you just spent 9 months not absorbing a lot of expensive supplements. So she switched it up. We went to a triglyceride base, and she also switched it up when she took it. So she's taking it with food now. She's on a lower dose, 1,200 milligrams, and she's almost right at that 8%. She's at 1,400, I bet she hits 8. So for her, you can spend a lot of money and time not really getting the benefit of these supplements, which are high quality, but for her, the way she was taking it, she wasn't getting anything out of it. Consistency is everything. This is Bridget. She came in at 6%. She was also said she was on 2 grams a day of triglycerides. And I know that she knows what that means. She knows how to understand labels, but she was inconsistent because she didn't like it. She just didn't like the type of pill. She didn't like the routine. It didn't work for her. So we switched her to an ethyl ester that were 2 capsules, easier to swallow, and she was consistent. She took it with breakfast, and so she got herself up to 8%, and that's where she was able to stay on an ethyl ester. So it's not that triglycerides are always better than ethyl esters. It's really finding out what works for each individual. A maintenance dose, we get asked about this a lot. So what does it take to get to 8%? Can I go down after that? This was Carla. She was on 3 grams a day coming in. And so she was at 8%. But we kind of wanted to play and see, can we go down to 2 grams? And because they were 1 gram capsules, we couldn't do a smaller dose down. But it went down, so it kind of matched what she was taking. It was responding in real time. 7% still great, but she wanted to be over 8, so she went back up to 3,000, and that's what it's gonna take for her to maintain a level above 8% without changing her background diet. So those are just some of the people that I interacted with over the course of the last few years in using the omega-3 index. And my main takeaways are, you aren't what you eat, you're what you eat, digest, and absorb. And the main variables affecting the omega-3 index are the dose, the form in the food, and consistency. And using testing and the omega-3 index as a personalized nutrition tool can help people be strategic about what they're doing to get to 8%. And I just think it's important to not only have the testing to help guide your pathway, but also to have it at the end to really prove to yourself that what you're doing is worth it. I think that's a big motivational key. So that's all I have to share today. Thank you so much for listening, and I think questions are next.